Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over, the grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be with you on a Monday. I told you I'd be back on Mondays, so we're going to try to be a man of our word. Kind of. We'll see. Happy to be back, though. It was a fun, entertaining weekend of sports, and we're going to hit it all. So we'll jump into that. But first, let me tell you about our partners, Black Desert. Black Desert Resort isn't just your home. It's an endless retreat where life has played your way. From intimate studios to spacious four-bedroom suites, the raw beauty of southern Utah is your new backyard. Discover its championship golf course, exquisite dining, and world-class outdoor adventures, all yours to conquer. This is luxury your way. Learn more about owning a luxury residence at blackdesertresort.com. Come play, come stay. All right, well, let's just jump right into it. So we've got some Utah stuff to talk about, but first, let's hit some NFL playoffs. This was a fun weekend, right? It's the championship games for the AFC and NFC. One great game, one game that kind of played out the way that we expected. The Eagles absolutely trounced the Commanders, and there really wasn't much hope for the Eagles or the Commanders. They, obviously does a phenomenal job as a team getting there, even in that spot. Jaden Daniels, a phenomenal talent. Obviously, Utah's very well versed in who Jaden Daniels is. The one-time silent commit to Utah, who then last minute, switched and then eventually ends up, in the SEC and wins the Heisman and all that kind of stuff. So, phenomenal season for Jaden Daniels and the Commanders. As a Cowboys fan, I hate both of those teams personally. It is what it is. But it's good to see for the Eagles. Obviously, they started out the season not as great, but we're able to do well. And for Britton Covey, he gets an opportunity to now be in the Super Bowl. He's been on the IR and all that. So it's been a tougher season for him and not being able to be active, but gets the opportunity to be in the Super Bowl and kind of that experience. So, but the game that everybody's talking about is obviously the Bills and Chiefs. And depending on what side of the aisle you are, you're either a Chiefs fan or you're not, and that's kind of the situation here. I live in a house where my wife's family has been diehard Chiefs fans their entire life. So this dynasty run that they're in has been phenomenal for them, and they're happy. I'm happy for them. But at the same time, I don't share that same passion as them. They've been kind of my adopted team since the Cowboys haven't done anything for the last 30 years. But it's still not, I still don't hold true to them the same as my team, despite my frustrations with them. So it's been an interesting perspective to kind of be afar and this person outside of it, while also having very close ties to a family that is Chiefs fans. So an interesting situation. Obviously, any team that is at the top, teams or fans want to see them go, right? They've had their time in the spotlight. Teams want to see them go. That was my team, back when I was a kid, obviously winning Super Bowls and actually beating the Bills twice in the Super Bowl, to keep them from that trophy. I guess we can share that similarity, but it's tough, right? You see that in any level of sport, any of the top teams, everybody wants to see them go down, right? And it's them against the world. For a long time in college football, it's been Alabama or Georgia or Ohio State. It's those types of teams. Locally, it's Corner Canyon, quite honestly. You have teams like that where there's always going to be this team that you hate because they're successful, right? And you can claim different things and be frustrated by it. And obviously the narrative around the Chiefs is that the refs pay, or they're paid, or in the pocket of the Chiefs, or whatever it may be. I watch it from a different vantage point, and yes, there's some things that may go in their favor, but for the most part, I think it's overblown. Personally, I think it's just the nature of a team that is good, getting people that are frustrated with it, right? The Yankees experienced this, the Patriots experienced this, all kinds of teams are experiencing that kind of stuff when you reach success. So, it's frustrating when you see different things on the field that happen, but let's not pretend like this doesn't happen in every single game, right? Maybe it happens more for the Chiefs. I don't know. That's not my beat. I don't cover the NFL, so I'm not getting into that too much. But interesting, conversations about this because of what it is. But the point I'm bringing this all up, and that is because there's two guys on the Bills that have local ties, obviously, because they played at the University of Utah. And that's Dalton Kincaid, who obviously is in his second year with the Bills. He's projected to do really well with the Bills. There's been a lot of optimism about him and what he can do, as well as Cole Bishop, rookie season, gets the start for the Bills this week. So I mean, what a phenomenal opportunity for him to be able to start his rookie season and pivotally, in the most pivotal game of the season. And it's not like he was just a role player. He was an active participant in that. So first off, starting with Kincaid, obviously everybody's going to talk about the last play of the game for the Bills, right? So the Bills have a fourth down situation. You get that first down and you're alive and potentially have an opportunity to at least kick a game-tying field goal, set yourself up for success that way. And based on the situation and the time that was going into this, it felt like the Bills had this one wrapped up, right? I mean, they were down, and so, you still have to get the score. But it felt like the Bills had that locked up, right? Plenty of time. Josh Allen's a phenomenal talent. Has done a really great job this year of not just relying solely on his legs. Obviously, he is a runner, and they want to maximize that and his potential. But they've done a really good job of being able to spread the ball around and get it to the running backs or have it in the arms of his receivers or tight ends or whatever that may be. And so it's been a phenomenal season for him, right? Obviously, he's being in the conversation with the MVP, and that's another debate between him and a guy like Lamar Jackson, and different things like that. But at the same time, both of them lost to Patrick Mahomes, who quite honestly did not have a phenomenal season, right? It was just not a great year. The Chiefs won a ton of games, got to be where they are as the number one seed, but he just didn't have the season that you would expect for, arguably the best player in the league. So an interesting situation, and yet at the end in the playoffs, I think the stat is they've won 17 straight or 9 straight. No, 9 straight playoff wins for the Chiefs. It's a remarkable task, and they're going for a three-peat as the first ever team to do that. But anyways, back to the Bills. So you get this situation where the Bills were really in control, and they get pushed into this 4th and long situation, call a timeout, trying to regroup, see what you're going to do. You have to go for it in that situation. There's 2 minutes left in the game at that point, and if they don't get it, the Chiefs essentially can wear out the clock. Maybe you have hopes that you can get them on a 3 and out and stuff, but essentially this was it for the Bills. So, Spagnuolo for the Chiefs dials up a corner blitz, if I remember right, and just absolutely blitzes Josh Allen. He immediately has to, trot back, and he's under duress, and he makes this heave that, from our vantage point on the TV, it's always interesting to watch these things, but from the vantage point on the TV, it just looks like he chucks it up, right? And obviously he's got more accuracy and understands where his players are at better than what it looks like on TV, but he heaves it downfield, and Dalton Kincaid is on the receiving end of this, right? And the play is a little short to where Kincaid was, and so he has to kind of come back a little bit. The ball wasn't, this perfect spiral to him by any means. But Kincaid, essentially has the ball in his grasps, and it just falls out. It slips, and the Bills, end up losing the game because the Chiefs were able to go get a first down and wear out their clock, and the rest is history, right? So easy to kind of look at that and blame Kincaid for that. Anybody that knows, Kincaid and has watched him at Utah understands the type of player that he is, that those are unusual plays, right? And in the situation that it was kind of a tough play, right? Sure, it goes into his hands, but it was one of those things that it was not an easy catch. And you have 3 defenders on you. You're trying to do something in a pivotal moment. It's a tough situation. And knowing Kincaid, that's going to bug him for a long, long time. But at the same point, nobody on the team is blaming him. Dawson Knox, his fellow tight end, said there's not going to be a single person here that's going to put the blame on him. And there shouldn't be, right? It happens in sports. You drop a pass, it comes down to it where you look at it as that is the one play that defined it, but there's a million other plays in a game that change it, right? And so Kincaid will obviously see that in his nightmares and not be happy about it. But at the end of the day, that wasn't the play that killed him. It was the finality of it, right? But it wasn't the play that killed him. So tough situation. He ends the game with 2 receptions for 13 yards, had 4 targets in the game. Obviously, that last target was not the most ideal pass, but made the best of it considering. So great opportunity for him. He's on a team that is going to continue to showcase him. Obviously, he needs to continue to do more to be able to kind of get in the mix. But being in the NFL is tough, right? And this is a tough league. You've got 2 of the best teams going at it against each other. That Chiefs defense has they're not the best. I don't want to say they're the best out there, but they've improved over the years and have been really, really good in being able to do what they do. So, it sucks for a Utah player to be able to be in that mix, but at the same time, if he makes that catch, everything changes and everything works. And it's funny how sports works that way, right? 1 second you're kind of the villain, and the next you could be a hero based on one little thing. So even though the whole game is played out in a different way, right? There's so many different things that happen. Quite honestly, the Bills could have instead of chasing points early, gone for the point afters, or done different things, right? You can always go back as a team and look at where you kind of screwed up or what happens, and that's the nature of it. And that's why, as we said earlier in the season with the BYU-Utah game, the one holding penalty that was called in the game, and we don't need to drub this up completely, but that doesn't necessarily fully define the whole game, right? Utah failed to score that second half. We built this up. So there's different things. It's easy to look at the final play and see it as a finality moment, but it definitely, there was more that could be done. But in a game like that where you have 2 teams just kind of giving it their best, they do matter, right? And it sucks for him. But, kudos to him for being able to be in that position and do that. I know that's, every kid's dream that dreams of playing in the NFL is to be in that moment where you could be the hero, right? Where, like I said, if he catches that, suddenly, Dalton Kincaid is never buying drinks in Buffalo. He becomes a cult hero, and everybody loves him, and it'll be a name that is etched in history forever. And maybe he's now etched in history forever with a different situation, but I think this is an opportunity where it can drive you and change you. If you remember right, years ago, Marcus Williams, former Utah safety, he was on the receiving end of a very, very bad situation where he slipped and missed the tackle that allowed the opposing team to be able to go score a touchdown and move on in the playoffs. And it was a big driving factor for him, right? It's something that helped him, and he's become a much improved player in the league, and that's just the nature of this, right? You're going up against the best athletes of the world, and if you're not always on your game and you're not always in the position to be able to do it, it happens. And I still don't blame that fully on Kincaid. I know some people might, but that was a tough situation for him to be in. So, but then there's Cole Bishop. Cole Bishop, like I said, he gets the start in this pivotal game for the Bills. They had a lot of trust in him, and being able to put him in that position. Obviously, they had a lot of optimism about him and where they drafted him, but they felt like he could be an impact player in year 1, and then unfortunately suffered an early season injury that kind of hurt his progress a little bit. But at the end of the day, he's in at the starter position in his rookie season. in the pivotal game. So great opportunity for him. He leads both teams with 10 tackles. He had 1 assist and 1 near interception, and that 1 near interception gets another conversation. So 2 Utah players in the mix of key moments in this game. What happened is Cole Bishop made a great play on the ball. Goes up, grabs the ball from Xavier Worthy, has it in his hands. Worthy has his hand on the ball as well, one hand on the ball, and they both come down with it. The refs ultimately decide that it was kind of a 50-50 ball that Xavier Worthy had control of, right? The ball did touch the ground. The ball didn't move from my vantage point. Look, I'm not some expert here, but the ball didn't move, and so I think that's probably why they sustained the call. Saying that Xavier Worthy was in control, and that set the Chiefs up for a big opportunity and obviously the score. But it was one of those that people are going to look back and say that the refs are on the Chiefs' side, and I don't personally. Like I said, I'm an objective viewer of this one. I don't view it that way. I understand that play is frustrating, but at the end of the day, the ball can hit the ground as long as there is control of it, and that's what they felt like he did. Right, whether it's right or wrong. That's the nature of what it is. And it's a tough situation, but they felt like he had control. You can sit here and argue every little point of it and everything, but that's the nature of it. Guys have a foot in bounds or they don't, and, maybe it's a little bit on the white or whatever it may be. These types of things matter, and the refs don't always get it. So, tough situation. Even if it is an incomplete pass because of that it was a penalty and the Chiefs would have had that, and, you could have argued that. But either way, Cole Bishop made a great play. He was in position a lot of times to be able to do what he needed to be able to succeed. Once again, it turns a little bit, and that's Cole Bishop making that play. That's a huge play for the Bills, and you could call it a game-saving play, whatever that may mean early on in the game. But you had 2 Utah players that were in the mix. So I know it didn't fully go their way, and you can take it for what it's worth and blame them or whatever. I don't know. People are weird. People are going to blame you for everything. But these are the players that are making the plays. They're involved in it. They're in the mix. It's a good opportunity for Utah to kind of use that and say that these are the players that are in there, especially for somebody like Cole Bishop. Morgan Scalley this whole week has been tweeting about these pro players that have come from the U and kind of their accolades and different things like that. Obviously, both of these guys are in that mix, and Cole Bishop being the latest there where as I mentioned, being a starter in the AFC Championship game, I mean, that's a huge opportunity and only does more for you as a program to be able to recruit, right? Saying that you can get these guys in the NFL, and that's always going to be used for teams. So interesting situation for these guys. Obviously, it didn't end up on the right side for them. But the Chiefs have Alex Whittingham, who is now in his 4th of 5 Super Bowls in 5 years, whatever it is. He already has 3 rings. It's a great opportunity for him. So another former Ute. He's on the coaching staff, obviously, but another opportunity for another Utah guy to be involved in the mix. I know the Whittinghams were out there and saw firsthand their son being able to be involved in that. So an interesting situation for them, interesting situation for Utah football and kind of their the people that have come through the program and what's gone on. So just kind of thought it was interesting, get involved with that, a lot of fun, but, that's all we're going to talk about that today. This isn't an NFL podcast. So debate amongst yourselves about how frustrated you are, whether you're a Chiefs fan or you're the world going against them. Still an entertaining game. I mean, I don't think you can watch those games and not be entertained unless you're a Bills fan. And I have a neighbor who is a diehard Bills fan and he's devastated. I didn't reach out to him. He'll talk to me because he knows I'm not a Chiefs fan. But my family, he refuses to talk to on these weeks. But he reached out to me instead of me reaching out because I don't want to be that guy. And he was obviously frustrated with it, but entertaining games, right? Like you can't ask for a better game in terms of coming down to the wire. It wasn't the same in the Eagles-Commanders game. Obviously a divisional game, which is fun and has some excitement, but the Eagles were way better in that game. Saquon Barkley, phenomenal athlete. You put him in green, and suddenly he's this phenomenal athlete. Not that he wasn't in New York, but New York is what it is, and they decided to invest in the wrong player, and that player is no longer on the roster. So interesting situations. I think that kind of goes to the conversations I had a couple weeks ago or a couple podcast episodes ago about how general managers in college football and what that's going to do for teams and kind of how you can miss or do different things that way. But kind of fun situation anyway. So the football is good. Obviously 2 weeks until the Super Bowl, and it's a retread of Super Bowl 2 years ago. But look, I'm going to watch. I enjoy football. I'm sad when it's gone. I've said this to many people. Growing up, the NBA was my sport, and March Madness. I didn't really care for the full seasons of college basketball. I was honestly never really a collegiate sport guy until I became an adult. So it was always professional leagues, and the NFL was always my number one. That and the NBA, those two were just, I watched everything. And to this day, I could still turn on any NFL game, barring maybe a few teams, and not really care what's going on because I just like to watch good football. As the years have gone on, though, like basketball has really kind of become secondary, if not much more secondary to the NFL and college football. I just feel like football has been much more entertaining. For some reason, I can't get into basketball as I used to. I was talking to the media members after leaving the Runnin Utes game the other day, just saying like it's been really tough for me to stay as engaged in college basketball as it once was. And I don't know why that is personally. I mean, that's just a personal preference. I used to be the guy that wished he could come up with his own bracketology and come up with these advanced stats and different things like that. Like I'm that kind of a nerd that would love that stuff and would come up with it and research it and do that kind of stuff. And it's soured over the last few years, and maybe that's watching the Runnin Utes forever. I don't know. But I just, even the NBA, I don't care about the NBA as much as I used to. I could watch the NBA finals and do all that. Now I couldn't care less. And so it's been interesting for me, so when the Super Bowl ends, college football playoff ended last week, it's rough for me because I love to watch that. I'll still watch these other sports. Don't get me wrong. I'm a sports fan and love to be able to do it. But football is clearly number one in my life, and I enjoy it. And my family enjoys it as well. It's one of those things where on Sundays you can turn it on, and my wife enjoys it just as much, and she'll watch any game with us as well. So it's a family affair. We enjoy it and have fun. So we'll move on from that, though. We're going to turn to basketball now that I've just dogged on it and said that basketball isn't my love anymore. But, we're going to go into it. The Runnin Utes. Ah, man, the Runnin Utes. So, you go on this 3-game win streak. And look, these weren't against necessarily, at least all of them, they weren't against teams that are in the upper echelon of the Big 12 right now, right? You get Oklahoma State at home. Did a really phenomenal job against them. Looked like Utah kind of turned a corner against TCU on the road. I mean, nobody's won at TCU, right? Like, especially going up into that game. And Utah played great team basketball where the aggressors did phenomenal, right? It was one of those moments where you're like, okay, Utah maybe has figured this out. Granted, TCU, like, they're near the more upper echelon parts of the teams, but they're probably not there, in the Houstons, the Baylors, the Iowa States, those types of teams, but, up there. And then Utah obviously has that gutted out win against BYU in overtime. And both of these teams are probably more similar than they'd like to admit, despite BYU having a far bigger advantage in terms of kind of the athleticism and the players that they have on the roster. But it is what it is. Utah got the win, and I'm curious to see that rematch at the end of the year and kind of how that goes. But look, Utah was on a 3-game winning streak. The confidence was high. Everybody was excited about it. They talked about this being kind of the turning point and being able to have everything kind of in front of them and starting to figure out Big 12 play a little bit. It is definitely different than the Pac-12, but, it's just kind of figuring that out. And you started to see some guys maybe separate as kind of quote-unquote stars of the team that were starting to get there. And in an instant, you travel to Houston, and it completely derailed everything. Now, look, as I mentioned on our last podcast, Houston's going to derail everything for anybody, right? So this isn't like some crazy statement that, how dare Utah not be able to do it. Granted, Utah was a no-show for that game. So, I mean, it's a combination of things where Houston just absolutely showed their dominance as well as Utah just not even doing anything. But there was optimism, at least from the coaching staff, from the players, that they've learned from that loss, they've learned from a previous loss in the season or, early in the conference play against Baylor where they just didn't show up either. And when you welcome Baylor to town, it felt like this could be a winnable game, right? And, Baylor's still a better team. There's a lot more athleticism, a recent pedigree of being successful, obviously national champions a few years back. But I mean, there's a lot to build on, right? And being able to be there. But given that it's a home game, given that, Utah has kind of started to figure things out as much as they had, there was hope. There was legitimate hope from people that could be a game that Utah could win. And to the credit for the Utah fan base, I mean, they packed the Huntsman Center. It wasn't the BYU game, and it wasn't fully, sold out or anything. But that lower bowl was essentially full. And as much as there's been a lot of complaints about the fandom coming into the Huntsman Center, this year has actually been pretty solid. Obviously fans, the team probably wants more. You're always going to want more, and you want a sold out environment. You want to be able to attract that kind of attention. But for the most part, the crowd has turned out well, and they've come and they've supported the team. They're in the mix with it. Everything's there. Now it comes to the point where the team has to deliver, right? And early on, the team delivered. Utah jumps out to an 11-2 run or lead. Ezra Asar is largely the reason for that. I think he had a quick 6 points. Had this monster dunk in the first 2 minutes of the game. Looked like he was going to go on a tear. And Utah was in the mix. If I remember right, Gabe Madsen may have hit a 3-pointer. So there's this conversation in your head going on that okay. Maybe this is the answer that Utah really is back. Not back in the sense that, they're an NCAA tournament team and, they're suddenly competing against every team in the conference, but back in the sense that they're going to play competitive basketball, right? And so everything's going well, get the 11-2 lead, early on in the game. I mean, there's so much time left in the game, and the floor fell out from underneath them. It was like they couldn't figure out how to play basketball. Whatever, that first few minutes were, and look, got to give credit to Baylor on that end too, where they made some adjustments in a timeout, came out much more aggressive, played their game plan much better. But on the same vein, Utah didn't. It's not, it wasn't even a matter of adjustments. It's that Utah just stopped. And, they weren't always getting the same looks that they wanted. They weren't moving the ball the same way. They weren't the aggressors anymore. Suddenly they were allowing Baylor to dictate the tone of the game, and it kind of put them on their heels and didn't allow them to be able to do what they needed to. And so Baylor suddenly goes on this 22-3 run. Utah couldn't buy a basket from the field. The only points that they could get was maybe from the free throw line. And as you know, free throw line has not been friendly to Utah. This has not been a great opportunity for them. And so those points were limited. Outside of Miro Little hitting 6 of 6 from the free throw line, I don't think Utah got any free throws in. Maybe one on out of a splitting the situations. But for the most part, Utah was not doing well. And so, Baylor jumps out to this big lead. Suddenly the game had turned, and, this home crowd that was on your side, they were still involved and they were still in the game, but Utah wasn't. And it really hurt the momentum going forward. Now, to Utah's credit, they battled back at the end of the first half, finally got some shots to fall. You got some 3-pointers from Mason Madison to fall on back-to-back succession. Miro Little hit one. And you cut the lead down to 7 after being in double digits for quite a while. I mean, you take a near double-digit lead and then suddenly have that turn on you in a 22-3 point swing. I mean, it was massive, right? And Baylor controlled the terms from that point forward. Second half, Utah gets it as low as 6, I believe, and then it just was over from there. Utah had no hopes. They couldn't get anything to fall. The only one that was really making things work was Ezra Asar again, and I'll talk about him in a second. But this was just not a great situation for Utah, and they end up losing 76-61. So, a rough spot. You're starting to see it more on the faces of the players and the coaches. Craig takes every loss hard, right? He's a competitive guy. He likes these games. In the same vein, he knows that his team isn't the team that can fully compete in the Big 12. You can see it in his eyes, right? And he speaks it. He says they need more athleticism. He needs more guys to be able to do what he needs to. And I think, that's the hard part is being able to know that your job is tied to that, knowing that you're not able to get there. And part of that's recruiting, part of that's retention, and all that stuff. But, this is, is he going to be looking for another job after that? Maybe. And I think that's the hard part for him, right? So anyway, Ezra Asar ends with 19 points, 7 rebounds. His biggest fatal flaw right now is he went 5 of 11 from the free throw line. And he's talked about it. He's talked about it needing to have confidence. It's not one of those things that he I don't want to say he doesn't stress about it, because, I think it is an active thing in his mind, but he says it's honestly just confidence. He's like, going up there, it's a confidence thing. And so I want to play some audio from him, because he has arguably been Utah's best player the last stretch, right? He's been able to get in there, kind of get in the mix and understand what's going on. And so I asked him at the end of the game, kind of like, why are you being able to kind of unlock it, right? Because early on it wasn't there. He's obviously starting to see that he can play with these guys. Yes, you're in the Big 12 and there's this competitive game, but he's been able to play. And this is his response. And it's about him, but it's also kind of about the team, and kind of how he's kind of, seeing it from his vantage point.
Just staying hungry, just trying to have a hungry, competitive spirit. I just think that's been the biggest goal. And with this game, like a lot of things just come being mentally prepared. And you got players that just get frustrated, and the confidence drop. But I just think the main key is always remain confident, rather what situation you're going through. And I think just continuously to just keep encouraging myself, my teammates, and my teammates encouraging me, vice versa. I just think that's kind of a big key when it comes to making sure everybody's head is straight. Mentally, it's a big thing, honestly. Like, just always being confident. So I just been being confident, playing hard, and again, like, the sky's the limit. I'm not at my best, I feel like, and I feel like I always can do better, and I always say that. So it's just consistency, just trying to build consistency, and that's also a challenge, being consistent at basketball, because teams got scouts, and when you look at the first half, you try to adjust in the second half. So it's a lot of things about it, but for me, it's just being mentally prepared, encouraged.
I think there was a great, honest answer from him where he talked about just not being able to be fully where he thinks he can be, but also it's just confidence, it's consistency, it's being able to be always that guy that brings the energy, right? And I think you're starting to see that more from him as a guy that is trying to take it over for the team, right? He's trying to be able to be the guy that they can rely on and provide some energy. And unfortunately for this Utah team, they haven't been consistent with that, right? Like, there's something about this team where they all play together connectedly, right? Like, they work well together, and in the locker room, there's not any fractured play. There's not anything that way where they're frustrated by another person. Obviously, some guys want more minutes than others, but I think you can see on the court that some of that merited when you're not on the court. But at the same time, like, this is a team that is generally connected, and so there's not a lot of backbiting that there has been in some years, or guys frustrated. And yet there's just not been consistency in terms of how they come out there. There's times where, you have these high energy guys, where it's Ezra, or it's Keanu Dawes, or even Caleb Lohner for that matter, where they come out there, Lawson Lovering, and then in other moments where it just kind of fades away. And I understand playing for a full 40 minutes at a high energy, a high pace is tough, right? Like, I get that. But at the same time, this is what Craig's trying to condition them to do, is trying to be able to be the aggressors. Because let's look. This is not a team that has a star. And you can say that they, maybe have different aspects of a star, and I'll get into that in just a second. But at the same time, this is a team that has to play together as a team, work together as a team to be able to get these wins. They're not going to just go into a game and, rely on one person to do it. This has to be a team effort. And, Ezra Asar is starting to be that guy, and he's starting to get in there. He's got that more confidence. He's trying to be that energy guy, and it's showing from the tape and everything. His like I said, his fatal flaw is that he can't hit from the free throw line, but he's doing it, right? Like, it's hard to fault a guy that is in there in the mix, trying to do the best. Gets a team-high 19 points, 7 rebounds. Like, clearly the stats, just the basic stats show that he's in the mix, right? Against some really phenomenal athletes that are some of them being talked about as NBA lottery picks, guys that are maybe in the mix to be in the NBA. I mean, that says a lot of what he's able to do. Miro Little provided a little bit more edge in the game, finishes with the second high, 12 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists. Really complete game for him. Provided a big spark off the bench. This is a guy that, started the season in the starting unit, has been up and down with his minutes. Some games he's getting 5 minutes, some games 7, some games 25. Like, it's just been up and down. And, Craig Smith talked about this, where he needs to be more consistent and he needs to be able to, be in the mix there. And so this is an opportunity for him to be there. And granted, there was some added motivation going against his former team, but at the same time, you're not getting consistency out of him. But when he was in there, when Caleb Lohner, another guy that was going against his former team, they had another edge that kind of fit with what Ezra was doing. And it's tough because you're getting guys that are doing it sporadically, and it's not kind of gelling with the rest of the team. You saw in that BYU game, when you had, let's say, Lawson Lovering and Ezra Asar playing together as the aggressors, it completely changed the tone of the game, because now you had two guys that were absolutely making it unstoppable for BYU to not pay attention to them, right? There's times where you could say, look, he's not playing aggressive. We don't need to do that. We're going to worry about, the three-point threat, or we're going to do this and key off this guy, whatever that may be. But when you have two aggressive guys or more, right, obviously you need more, it's really hard to contend with teams. And that's why a lot of these teams like to play with pace, because if they can be the aggressor and they can play with speed and they're doing it in a disciplined manner, then it's really tough to be able to beat those teams. You can have teams that are ranked 300 in the RPI or whatever it may be, come beat a team in the top 25 because of that. That's why you see this in March, right? You're seeing guys that want it more. They want that consistency. The beauty of March and what makes it so great is you have one game that defines it. There's no preconceived notions about it other than a 1 versus 16 type situation or 2-15, whatever that may be. You've got games that can change in an instant because you've just got a team that wants it more. And right now, I don't know that Utah wants it more. And I know that that's frustrating for fans to hear, but you see it in the floor, right? You've got a team where collectively, yes, they want it, right? But there's a difference between me saying I want $1 million and me actively working towards and get it, right? Maybe I don't want it that much because I don't have $1 million, right? Like, let's be real. If I wanted it, I'd probably go work in something else. But that's the thing, there's anything with that. Like, if you really want to be competitive in a game, go be competitive in a game. The problem is it hasn't been consistent with this team. And that's the toughest thing for Utah to deal with, is it's just been inconsistent play and you're not getting a lot of help. And so, I think there's frustrations. I think that, Miro Little, he gave the standard talking points at the end of the game where it's just like, it's difficult. This is a new team dealing with the new Big 12, trying to figure out the play, and I'm not saying he was BSing his way through this. I mean, I think he was being genuine in his answers, but he was talking about just like, look, this is a team that needs to do it. And then Ezra Asar, he gets asked a follow-up question, and he kind of does this little sidestep to that. And he just says, look, Baylor played 7 players. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter, how many players, look, they played 7 players, they should be able to be more competitive. They should be able to put more attention on them. Baylor had 3 or 4 players with 4 fouls. Go after them. There's another few players that had 3 fouls. They fouled a ton in that game because they were trying to be aggressive. They were trying to take opportunities. Their hands were in the mix all the time. And so in the right situation, if a ref doesn't see it, look, you're jarring the ball away, or you're making it difficult by keeping a hand in the mix and you're not able to get a clean shot. That's the difference, right? Baylor isn't the same team that won a national championship a few years ago. They're just not there. They've got great pieces. They've got a lottery pick player in Edgecombe. They've got pieces that can be phenomenal. And the difference there is they're playing aggressive. They're playing like they want to win. Whereas Utah is allowing teams to be able to come into them. They're letting them dictate the terms of a game. They're allowing them to be able to kind of get them off their spots and not get clean looks because they just don't really want to get there. And that's at least the effort on the court. And so that's the challenges with this team, right? Is you can't teach effort. You can coach it up and you can kind of do these things. And I know those are those cliche type statements, but at the same time, this is a team that isn't there, and they have to play as a team. This is a team that does. Look, let's just be honest. This is a team full of role players, And there's not that one guy that steps up and says, hey, I'm going to take this game into my hands and I'm going to do it, right? Like Ezra Asar maybe is starting to get to that point. He's starting to kind of be that guy, but it's still such a small sample of work, and he still has some room to grow. And that's not to say you shouldn't. Look, Kyle Kuzma, early on in his career, you could see potential where he could be the guy. And even in his last year, there was times where he would kind of shrink in games. For the most part, he was consistent, right? Like, I don't want to besmirch that, because he was consistent and he was the guy that they could turn to. I think he just kind of got tired of being the only guy on a team of role players, right? And it became a challenge, especially near the end. And, he was the last one fighting, and it didn't feel like anybody else had it. But at the same time, this is a team that, in the current structure, doesn't have that guy. And they really haven't had that guy for a few years. Maybe this year, you could make cases, and I still don't think you could make cases in terms of them being the guy, but at least they could be maybe close to the guy Mike Sharv jumps. There's a lot of optimism. He's much more of a facilitator. If his shot developed a little bit more, maybe he could be that deadly threat where you always have to watch for him because he's going to take his shot, but if not, he's going to pass it and set you up for another great pal, right? Potential. Miro Little, a guy that has some potential, still probably more of your secondary guy, but, maybe. Keanu Dawes, still young in the system, can be that effort guy. Like I said, I think the young side of it in terms of his maturation in the program still needs to be there. He has moments where, he's this full aggressive guy, but you kind of have to tame that to some extent, and kind of get more out of yourself than just being the guy that's going to go dunk it, right? Or go chase the ball down. All great assets, right? Don't get me wrong. But I think there needs to be more done to take it to the next level where he can be the guy that you trust at the end of a game or something like that. Still, I don't think that's kind of fits his skill set. Lawson Lovering. Not the same as a Brandon Carlson in the sense that you can kind of make him your post player and be the guy that take over the game. Don't get me wrong, Lawson has shown much more improvement in that game. He's done a phenomenal job this year of being able to be in there, get in the mix. You're not seeing a lot of the plays that you saw in the past where he'd get close to the rim and it was almost a guaranteed rim out, or, he would not shoot the ball well. He wasn't going up aggressively. Sometimes that's what happens with big players. But you're seeing that maturation with him, which tells me that the coaching staff is working with him and he's learning it, especially in the offseason, right? And I think that's the biggest thing for him is, over the year, he developed and he became that guy because he continued to be able to get, off-season help. That matters as much as anything with this team. And you can be frustrated that Utah's not there yet, but they've had continual turnover, and it matters to be able to have consistency. And so, you can fault Craig, and yes, there's pieces of that, but at the same time, if players don't want to stay in that system, it's tough, right? Because now you don't have that consistency. That's another conversation for another time. The point here is that Utah doesn't have that guy. And you can argue Gabe Madsen can be that guy, and when he's hitting his shots, he can be, because you can trust him, right? He can be the guy that you wanted in his hands at the end of the game. And, he's as close to the guy as possible. The problem is he's been in a shooting slump. And he has these, off games, not off, but on games, I guess we'll call it, where he can finally hit his shot, but it's been so much more sporadic than ever in his entire career. And I know that's a challenge for him. This is a guy that prides himself more than anybody. Like, this is a guy that, I don't know what your opinion is of him or anything, but he's on that floor constantly. Even when he was injured in past years, he was trying to get on the floor so much that they have to literally, lock him out of situations because he's always in the gym. And so maybe, Craig kind of joked, maybe there's a situation where they kind of don't let him practice because he's too much into it. But this is the most difficult stretch of his entire basketball career. And I understand fans that are frustrated with it, and they see it on Twitter, or, I see it on Twitter or wherever it may be, that you're frustrated with it. Because, yes, Gabe hasn't been the guy. He hasn't been able to help, at least on an offensive side of the ball. Now, I still think he's a valuable add to that team, if not for experience alone and just being able to kind of spread the floor out. But at the same time, yes, those shots have to fall. And when you're not being able to hit at a high level, that changes, right? And so that's the challenge for him, right? Like, he's not necessarily the guy, but he can be. He's probably the closest that you've got to that. And so therein lies the problem, is that Utah just doesn't have the guy, quote unquote, the guy, whatever that is. You can decide what you want with that. But basically, it's the guy in my mind who is going to come in there. He's going to, settle things down. He's going to be the one that brings the energy. He's going to be the leader on the floor. And it doesn't have to be, the point guard who's always the quote unquote floor general or whatever it may be. But you have to have a guy that you can trust and a guy that can go in there and say, look, we're down. Let's go take it to him, and I'm going to give my all and do it. And that's just not where Utah is. Looking in the past, Kyle Kuzma, Jakob Poeltl, DeLon Wright, those guys were it. Obviously, that's obvious because they translated to the NBA, right? Like, we get that. But I would argue that since 2016-17, when Kyle Kuzma left, Utah has struggled to have that guy. They haven't really had a person that you can give it to and take over. I would argue Brandon Carlson is probably in that mix the most. And he is a guy that can take it over. But I also think that it was done in a different way, and they didn't have the assets that like a Jakob Poeltl had, right? It's hard for a big guy to lead the way, in my opinion. It's generally not there. And obviously you can find that in the NBA, and you can find that in college and do different things. And I'm not saying it can't be. But I think it's just it takes other people helping to be able to provide that skill set that helps, right? And I still would argue that Brandon's in that mix. But outside of that, looking back on this, I kind of did some research last night, and the people that I can kind of point to as being the closest to this, obviously Gabe Madsen I put in there. The other two, Timmy Allen, maybe. I mean, Timmy Allen had his moments, and I think he, especially if he could have stayed with the system a little longer and had more consistency or better people around him, I think it could have been better for him. But at the same time, I don't think he ended up being the guy that they wanted to be. Obviously led with points and stuff, but he was not always the guy that you necessarily wanted the ball in his hands. There were moments, don't get me wrong, and I think, I don't want to, say bad things about him either, because I think he was a great asset for Utah. Just a bad situation for him. Davon Smith. I think he could have been that guy. If he had stayed at Utah, especially with another year under Craig Smith, I think he could have been that guy. And I think you look at that roster, if he comes back with Davon Smith, and he comes with this roster where you have Keanu Dawes, Lawson Lovering, Ezra Assar, any of these other guys in there, and you're able to have him as a facilitator, but also a guy that just changes the game, it could be a completely different game for this Utah team. And I hate to put it on just one player, and I don't think it's fully on one player, and the roster management and how they went after or pursued people would have probably been different. But at the same time, I think if you can get a dynamic guy like that, a guy that obviously was a triple-double machine, and a guy that was going to go in there and bring the energy, and sometimes he can be his own villain because he tries too hard to be the guy, but at the same time he was somebody that was trying to make it work, and he bought into the system. Everything was going well, and he just decided to leave. And so this is a challenge. It's a challenge to be able to have a team that is full of role players, right? And that's where I think people are frustrated. It's frustrated because Utah hasn't got anything more out of that. And that's even more to, how does Utah get out of this? Because you can't just necessarily go find somebody that's going to be that guy. They're either, on another team as a homegrown guy that's come through the system, or they're top dollar recruits in the NIL world. And so how do you attract that when you don't necessarily have a healthy NIL space? Look, and this is up for contention depending on who you talk to at the athletic department. The reality is, that BYU game alone, you had two players that were making more than the entire roster at Utah, at least allegedly, right? And so, it's a very difficult challenge to be able to be in the mix for these players that you can try to get it. Look, I'm not trying to say you need to go out there and draft some guy that's a lottery talent, or this guy is an instant guy into the NBA. You can have some development here. But that's where Utah's at. And I know Craig's, he understands this, right? He's not dumb. He understands what he has on his roster, and I think that's the hard part. But also the hard part is there's a lot of these guys he thought he had as the guy, and for whatever reason, they haven't lived up to the billing. Like I said, Ezra Assar has kind of been that guy lately. But there's other guys that you bring in where you're excited about their tape, you're excited about what they do, you get them into practice, they're saying and doing all the right things, but when it comes time to get into Big 12 play and get into those tough games, they're not there. And that's where Utah's at. And unfortunately for Utah, you're going to go up on 9 straight years where you haven't made the NCAA tournament. Like, barring some miraculous thing, they make it this year. That's not going to happen. But 9 years. And that's tough. That's a tough look, right? And I did some of that look as well, where I wanted to see out of these power programs, or even some of these teams are kind of the upper echelon of basketball that may not be in a power conference, what teams have had kind of longer streaks, right? And so there's 4 teams that haven't been back to the NCAA tournament. Well, so Cincinnati, right? 2018, 2019. That's not really that far away. That's one that's in the mix. There's a few other teams in that mix there. I bring up Cincinnati because they're in the league, or in the Big 12. SMU, 2016-17. Vanderbilt, 2016-17. Wake Forest, 2016-17. And if I'm not mistaken, last I looked, Vanderbilt has a really good shot of making it this year, so maybe they're going to break that. So you have 3 teams that they haven't been back to the NCAA tournament a year after Utah hadn't been. So Utah was already a year out of the NCAA tournament, right? Those are the teams that, are the longest active from there. Now, there's a few others, either worse than Utah or in the same situation. California, for example, they haven't been back to the NCAA tournament since 2015-16 as well. So Utah and California are exactly tied in their drought, okay? So 9 years. Beyond that, there's 4 other teams that haven't been able to make it to the NCAA tournament and haven't been able to do well. And quite honestly, outside of one of them, these aren't your programs that you're necessarily looking to for your basketball powerhouses, right? That's not to say that they can't have good teams, but they're not ones that you're looking at and saying they have a pedigree of having success, like Utah. And look, it's really easy to look back on the 90s or the early 2000s and say Utah has this pedigree, but the reality is the last little bit it hasn't been. It's been a long drought outside of the couple of years that Larry Krasowiak got his teams to the NCAA tournament with DeLon Wright and Jakob Poeltl. And so, for the last, 20, 25 years, Utah's essentially been out of the NCAA tournament. So those other teams, Georgia, the last time they were in is 2014-15. Stanford, 2013-14. Good teams, but never really in the mix for an NCAA tournament berth. Good NIT-type teams. UNLV obviously had a rich history of NCAA tournament berths and all that with Tarkanian and everything. They haven't been to the NCAA tournament since 2012-2013 season. That's tough. But also, Mountain West, right? Granted, they should be in there from the Mountain, whatever. They're not in a power conference, but I'm putting them in there because of where they used to be. And then Boston College, 2008 to 2009. That's your last power conference, and they have the longest streak. So really, 4-ish, 5 teams in there that have it worse than Utah. Or Cal, you can argue that they're the same. But once again, these are teams that necessarily didn't buy in fully in basketball. And for a long time, basketball was what it was at University of Utah. And so this just becomes the conversation that you have to have. Is this where Utah's destined to be? Is Utah destined to just be one of those teams that is, maybe lurking, you get an NIT bid, maybe you sneak into the NCAA tournament every year, or not every year, every once in a while? Or is there going to be an effort to be able to be made to get Utah back? And that's the conversation that Utah Athletics itself has to have, right? They either have to decide this is where we're at, we're going to invest fully into football or gymnastics or whatever it may be. Obviously, football and gymnastics are going to be 2 bigs that they invest in. But they have to decide, do they want to continue to try to invest in other programs, or are they going to just be okay with mediocre? Because the value in the NCAA tournament is the goal for any team. And if you don't make it to the NCAA tournament, that, whether you had a great season or not in terms of kind of being in the mix, you could be on the bubble and be the last one, standing where you don't get in. It doesn't matter. If you don't get to the NCAA tournament, nobody cares. That's the metric, right? You don't have that same metric in college football. Yes, the college football playoffs is kind of turning that a little bit, and that becomes it and everything there. But I think you view college football in a different lens, right? And so you can still, go win 10 wins in a season. That's kind of been the standard bearer. 10-win season is a great season for football. yes, you want to get into the playoffs, and obviously those are the upper echelon teams most years and everything, and or at least the teams that are performing at a high level that year. But it's a different metric. You don't have to be in the playoffs, still win 10 seasons and feel good about 10 games, still feel good about your season. You could even win 9 games and still feel good about your season. And depending on some programs, 7 or 8 might even be good, right? Utah, obviously, that's not the expectation. They wanted at least 10, and they want to be in the playoff. But that's because the expectations have been raised. They've put the emphasis in there. They have a coaching staff with consistency, and that's worked. Now, don't get me wrong. Craig Smith wants to be in the NCAA tournament more than anybody. This is the only place that he's never been there in his coaching tenure. And so it's very frustrating for him to be able to see that. But at the same time, you can see his eyes. He's honest with you. He knows he doesn't have that team. And I think you started to see him feeling more confident about his team this year in terms of what the potential could be. But the problem is it's this collection, as I've talked about, that they just don't have it. They have role players. They have an administration that hasn't fully invested into basketball, and you can argue that with me every single day of the week. I don't think many people will, but at the same time, they just haven't. They haven't invested in it the same way that you've invested in football. And I get it. Football is the moneymaker. But for basketball, men's basketball specifically, can be a secondary market, and it still makes money, don't get me wrong. But there hasn't been that same level of investment. And it's showing up on the court. It's showing up in the sense that, you're not able to attract these recruits that are going to be able to compete. It's showing up in the NIL amounts, and it's showing up in the fact that you haven't been to the NCAA tournament since 2015-16. All of those a bad look, right? And that's a really difficult spot for Utah to be in. So this becomes the point. Like, look, you can go out there and you can fire Craig Smith tomorrow. I don't know that that's going to change anything. And quite honestly, I don't think it actually does. You could bring in another Utah State coach, or you could bring in another guy that's this highly regarded coach, and maybe you bring in an alumni guy, and maybe that gets you some additional revenue because people are wanting to be able to have an alumni coach. I still, unless there's more that changes, I still don't think this works for Utah. And that's a very difficult spot for people to be in. Because unless Utah's going to invest in it, and in basketball, I think you can make this change more quickly than in any other sport. Although football, you're starting to see it being made quicker. I think in basketball, you can make that change quickly, but it takes investment. And it's not just an investment, but kind of a full attention to making it a good product. And right there, it's just not that. And I understand that's going to frustrate some people, but at the same time, it is what it is. So let's move on. Women's basketball, well, first off, men's, they have a game tomorrow, Tuesday night, at home against Cincinnati. That's a team that they should win, honestly. It's a game that's there for the taking. If Utah can't win that, then you really start having conversations about what this team could be or what the future is of the program. But we'll get to that point. And then on Saturday, they're on the road to Oklahoma State. Get the return trip for that series. Curious to see what happens there, right? Like, I think Tuesday's a telling point for that. I still don't think this team has, they're done. I don't think that they're, not fighting anymore. I think it's a team that really does want to fight. But curious to see. I think Tuesday will dictate Oklahoma State's game and what goes on there. Road game, obviously, it'd be great to be able to get on a win on the road, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what team comes out. All right, so now fully transitioning to women's. Utah goes on the road to Provo and beats BYU 81-76. BYU jumped out to a 21-15 lead in the first quarter amid 9 Utah turnovers. It just didn't look good. And look, I'm saying this not really being able to know much about this game because it happened at the exact same time as the men's basketball game. Quite honestly, I should have just traveled to Provo and watched that game, if I'm being honest. But watching highlights and seeing everything from afar while reading Twitter and kind of having it off to the side, I got to see some of it. And anyways, Utah started out with a lot of turnovers, didn't really work. But Gianna Neepkins and Maya Torre absolutely dominated in that game. A couple days after setting a career high of 30 points for Gianna Neepkins, I talked about it. She almost had the triple-double. She then goes and decides to break her own scoring career high again and gets 32 points. She was an incredible 6 of 7 from three-point range. She had 8 rebounds, 2 assists. Just was a nightmare for BYU. And outside of that performance, honestly, I think BYU maybe had a shot to win that game. Much closer game than many were expecting. It just didn't go well for Utah in terms of having more playmakers. Maya Torre, as I mentioned, did well as well. She had 21 points and 8 rebounds. Great effort from her. Honestly, when Gianna Neepkins and Maya Toure are on, it's very difficult to beat Utah, right? Because now your post is working and now your deep threat is working. It's very challenging to be able to beat Utah when both of them are on. So to their credit, they were both on the same night, and that absolutely led Utah to a win. Much closer, like I said, than was expected, but this is a good Utah team that, similar to the men's, they need to find consistency, but it's much more lessened in the sense that they are more consistent. It's more finding that consistency or that aggression and that edge in these upper level games, right? They've been able to do it at a high level against teams that are close to the top or in the middle or at the bottom. Sometimes this is a Utah team that kind of plays down to its competition, but for the most part, this is a team that's consistent. They just need to be able to find that next level to kind of help them unlock that for postseason. And their season's drawing to a close soon. I mean, it's only 1 week earlier than the men's, but it feels like this one's much closer to the end just because they end a week earlier. And so these games, they get tight, and, Utah needs to continue to kind of build this momentum. And if you're getting that kind of effort out of Gianna Neepkins every night, or at least close to, you can't get career highs every night. And if you do, phenomenal. But, if you're getting good efforts out of her and Maya and some other key players, I mean, that's a great opportunity for Utah. So, Kennedy McQueen got back into action for the first time since her injury a few weeks ago. Only played 12 minutes. You're not expecting her to come back fully. Came off the bench, got 3 points. That was off of a 3-pointer, 2 rebounds, 1 assist. Obviously she'll be acclimated to the system a little bit more as the games develop. But great opportunity for Utah to have her back. Once she's able to be in the mix where she can be back in that starting unit, that really unlocks what Utah wants to do. Then you can bring Maddie Wilkie off of the bench. You make her the 6th person and really change the game. Great opportunity for Utah there. So they have a game on Friday at home against Arizona. It'll be a tough game, but Utah should be able to win that. And all good there. And lastly, I've gone longer than I was expected. I got a little bit more into the men's basketball team than I was expecting. But the Red Rocks, they defeated BYU 196.9.7, or sorry, they said that so bad. I read that so bad. 196.975 to 195.325. I mean, this is, Utah was easily in the lead here. This wasn't anything great. The thing about this meet was that the scoring was incredibly low. And I think this has been the common thread for this season is scoring has been so inconsistent. And you have one meet, the best of Utah meet where Utah, at the time gets the highest score in the country, tying it with Oklahoma. And then a couple days later, they get this meet where they can't even break 197 for the 3rd time this year. So you're getting scores that are just all over the place. Part of that is because the judges are being reviewed this year, and the ones that have the most consistent scoring or at least are doing the right things are going to be there available for postseason play. The problem is there's just not consistency with these judges. And they don't like their scoring system in terms of them being reviewed and doing this. Like this is a whole big thing that's going on right now in the gymnastics world. I don't think we need to get too far into it, but the problem is you're getting 2 judges that are essentially deciding the fates of teams, because one judge will have like a score of a 995 and another a 985. Those are huge scores. I mean, that's a massive turn of events. And granted, look, that gives you a 9-9 and that's still a great score. But that shows that either one judge is being too strict or one judge is being too lenient, or they're both, one of them is right and the other's being too strict or lenient. You know what I mean? Like it's all over the place. And, there was a situation over the weekend where LSU, the reigning champions, only scored a 196 flat. And they lost to Arkansas, a team that they shouldn't have lost to, right? At least on paper. Livy Dunn, if you don't know who Livy Dunn is, she's arguably the most famous gymnast right now outside of Simone Biles or Jordan Childs or whatever. But she's on LSU, and she said that her complaints were not about LSU, but at the same time, she's complaining about the system of the judges. And this isn't, every year they're complaining about judges because the last few years, 10s have creeped up, and there's been so many 10s given for gymnasts, especially ones that weren't as perfect. And so it's led to where we're at now. But I think that the issue here is it's just all over the place. You can see a routine on one day that is arguably better and it gets scored lower, and that's what makes subjective sports really difficult to follow, is because there is nothing to be able to curtail that, right? And I think, from a media standpoint, you look at that and you look at how frustrating that is, because to me, I can go look at stats, right? I can say, okay, X player did X things, right? And I can see it. With gymnastics, I've watched these, routines many times, and, sometimes it's memory, sometimes it's different things. You can generally, though, say, McKenna Smith sticking her vault right here was way better than what she did on Monday, and yet on Monday she got a score that was this high, and on Friday she gets a score that's much lower. Those things, I understand those aren't the same judges, but at the same time, that's a very difficult sport to be in, where you're trying to be judged on that, where these scores matter. Because at the end of the day, you're ranked based on these scores. Your postseason play is determined by these scores. And you can argue that this will eventually all settle itself out when you get into postseason, regionals, nationals, that kind of stuff, where you're all in the same field. But that's not always that easy, right? It's not easy to judge yourself. And so these gymnasts are forced to just kind of trust that, they're doing the right thing, and as long as they're doing better than the other gymnasts out there. But it's tough, because you could have a routine that is better on paper and all the skills and everything, but one judge sees a deduction and the other doesn't. And it's a very difficult thing. But, we'll see what it is. Utah essentially gets the week off after 3 meets in 7 days. They now will travel to West Virginia, where they'll compete against West Virginia and Florida. Florida happened to get the first 198 score of the season. They're the leader in the country in terms of the highest score on the year. That all gets kind of washed away when the NQS comes out, the qualifying scores and all that kind of stuff. But interesting situation. It's something that has been a challenge for gymnasts this year, not just Utah, but just trying to figure that out. And they don't pay too much attention to it. I think that's been a big effort from Carly Dockendorf, is they don't want to pay attention to the scores. You have to, in the sense that, you got to be better than the team that you're competing with. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem this year based on Utah's schedule. But it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to be able to see where you need to improve, see what is actually being taken versus what is just being nitpicky, what judges are trying to go to the letter of the law so that they can be in postseason competition and be viewed highly. It's a challenge. So curious to see how that goes, but that's the end of where we're at today. Went long, like I said, so I apologize if you've listened to this whole thing. Kudos to you. I wouldn't want to listen to me for an hour either, but here you are. Some of you do like to do that. So, I hope to get some more stuff this week. If anything big comes up, we'll do another podcast, but if not, we'll recircle the podcast next week. But I appreciate any of you that listen. I really do. Honestly, it makes doing this worth it. It's not always easy in my schedule to kind of cut out this time to do a podcast, but I appreciate the people that do listen. As always, if you have any feedback or anything that you want to give me or have me talk about, I'm happy to discuss it. So hit me up. You know where I'm at, and we will have another conversation next time. Have a great day.